Hey guys, tonight we are going to uncover one of the longest standing historical mysteries of the Tudor dynasty. 6 women, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, all married the same man, the great but cruel King Henry VIII. 2 of them were killed by his own order. But tonight, the most important question isn't how they died, but where have they found their final rest? In this relaxing journey, we will visit, one by one, the final resting places of the 6 queens. You will find out which wife ultimately lies beside Henry VIII and close to the modern Queen Elizabeth II, why history records 6 wives, but we only find traces of 5 official grave sites, who had to end their life in a communal grave without a coffin, and notably, whose queen's remains are forever missing. We will also look at the memorials, who erected them, and why. Finally, we will contemplate why the children of the first 3 wives, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, who held supreme power, never bothered to move the remains of their own mothers to a more fitting place. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And for us to feel closer, let me know where you are watching from and what time it is where you are right now. At this hour, are you ready to close your eyes and listen? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Are you ready to gently close your eyes and listen? Let us begin with Catherine of Aragon. She was first the sister-in-law, and then the first wife of Henry VIII, the infamous King of England. Catherine, daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Aragon, had once shone as a star of the Spanish court before she married Arthur Tudor, Prince of Wales. When Arthur died, she was brought to England to wed his brother Henry, in order to maintain the political alliance between the 2 kingdoms. In 1512, the wedding of Henry and Catherine took place amid great rejoicing in the English court. Over the course of 25 years of marriage, Catherine gave birth 5 times, yet only 1 child survived to adulthood, Mary Tudor. She was praised for her patience, her steadfast loyalty, and her gentle demeanour. Yet, because she could not produce a male heir, Henry began to contemplate a new wife, in hopes of obtaining a legitimate prince. When Henry formally petitioned the Pope to divorce Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn, Catherine was stripped of her status and sent into exile at Kimbolton Castle in Cambridgeshire. In those final months, despite her illness, she received devoted care. Catherine passed away at 2 o'clock in the morning on January 7th of 1536. At the age of 50, not by execution or torture, but from what the physicians of the time diagnosed as a black tumour upon her heart, a condition they believed to be heart cancer, incurable in the 16th century. Without modern medicine or advanced facilities, she departed peacefully amid religious rites, without bloodshed or wounds from whip or blade. Catherine's funeral took place with solemn dignity on January 29th of the same year at Peterborough Cathedral. As a Dowager Princess of Wales, her burial rites lacked crown or royal insignia and were carried out quietly. A simple wooden coffin was lowered beneath the cathedral's vaulted ceiling, alongside countless other tombs, far from the high altar, a place reserved solely for reigning queens or the highest nobles. This refusal to interher near the main altar was a humiliating statement by the new regime, though it rendered her tomb humble and largely overlooked over nearly 5 centuries. Remarkably, Catherine's remains have seemingly never been disturbed. Some accounts suggest that in 1890, a team carrying out repairs may have opened her coffin to inspect the vault structure, but no official record confirms that they touched her remains. Many historians assert that her original burial site remains intact, serving as an enduring testament to the loyalty and sorrow of a queen in exile. Her only daughter, Princess Mary Tudor, after years of displacement and dispossession, finally ascended the throne as Queen Mary I in 1553. Mary fervently wished to transfer her mother's remains from Peterborough to Westminster Abbey, where English monarchs rest together, so that mother and daughter might share a grand tomb. In 1558, on her deathbed, Mary declared in her will, "Grant me the privilege to lie beside my mother at Westminster, beneath a tomb befitting her royal dignity." Alas, Mary, who left no heirs, was unable to fulfill this final wish. On March 23rd of 1602, Elizabeth I, half-sister to Mary, succeeded the throne. Under Elizabeth's reign, any attempt to relocate Catherine's remains might have reignited the controversy of that historic marriage and cast doubt upon Elizabeth's own legitimacy. Having long carried the stigma of being the king's daughter born out of wedlock, Elizabeth refrained from scandalizing the court. She allowed her mother's remains to remain undisturbed at Peterborough, as a quiet secret between maternal love and indifferent power. Today, Peterborough Cathedral still holds a brief annual commemoration on January 29th, where visitors light candles, recite prayers, and pause at the small brass plaque inscribed, "Catherine of Aragon, Queen of England, died January 7th, MDXXXV. There are no grand statues, no lavish flower displays, only the hush of the cathedral, the flicker of candlelight, reminding us that Catherine's love and unwavering loyalty still echo long after the reigns of men have faded. Next, our journey brings us to Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, whose life became legend through a tragic intertwining of love and politics. After years as the king's mistress in the royal court and giving birth to the infant Prince Edward, Anne fell into a whirlwind of courtly intrigue and was accused of treason and adultery with multiple men, including her own brother George Boleyn. These charges were orchestrated by Henry and the Investigative Council to legitimize his divorce and condemn her. On the morning of May 19th, 1536, the London sun blazed fiercely, heralding a day of destiny. One can easily imagine the crowd gathered around the Jewel House within the Tower of London, where Henry watched from the battlements above. Anne wore black attire and a brimmed hat concealing half her face, her expression resolute, yet steeped in profound sorrow. The silence was so complete that one could hear the wind whistling through the arrow slits. When the public trial concluded, she was led to the scaffold erected outside the Jewel House. The executioner was Jean Rambaud, a French swordsman summoned for his skill with the blade. With a single, precise stroke, the razor-sharp sword severed head from body, blood staining her black gown, an abrupt and brutal end for a former queen. Her death occurred in an instant, without a cry, closing the chapter on her power and dreams with one swift swing of the blade. Anne's remains were not placed in a lead coffin, as was customary for the nobility. Instead, her body was laid in a thin wooden chest, formerly an arrow crate, and buried beneath the floor of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, just a few paces from the entrance and directly in front of the altar. This was also the burial site of her brother George Boleyn, who had been beheaded 2 days earlier. The choice of location was remarkable, for it was the most prestigious spot in the chapel, typically reserved for the highest-ranking individuals. Yet even in disgrace, Anne was accorded this honour. Without embalming or ornate burial fittings, Anne and George were interred at the start of summer, when the earth was soft and the heat fierce. The stench of decay must have been overwhelming for the guards and the craftsmen restoring the chapel. Anne's bones were exhumed at least twice thereafter. The first time was in 1750, when a local woman named Hannah Beresford was to be buried in the same spot, forcing the removal of Anne's bones to make room. The second exhumation occurred in 1876, during renovations to repair the sinking chapel floor. Craftsmen uncovered scattered fragments of bone, jumbled without anatomical order, only enough to confirm the remains belonged to a woman of about 35, and at the exact spot recorded in historical accounts. Many fragments were broken or missing, so no evidence of a sword cut on the cervical vertebrae could be found. Rambaud's sword may well have obliterated the very trace that would have identified her decapitation. At the end of 1877, after the renovation was complete, the gathered bone fragments were placed in a lead casket inscribed Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, died May 19th MDXXXVI, and reburied in the original vault. A thick layer of concrete was poured above to deter any future digging, safeguarding her remains from prying curiosity. Since that time, the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula has lain in hushed solemnity, as if untouched by the events of centuries past. Whenever a candle flickers beside the stone plaque bearing Anne Boleyn's name, one can almost hear the whisper of the young queen abandoned by her emperor, struck down by the sword. In that sacred silence remain only murmured prayers and the footsteps of visitors, the echo of Anne's tragedy standing between ruthless power and the fragile span of a human life. And now, as Anne Boleyn's tragic story settles into silence, we turn our attention to Jane Seymour, the third wife of Henry VIII, who became queen only 11 days after her predecessor's execution. Jane, a gentle presence within the royal household, was the daughter of Sir Thomas Seymour, a former admiral of the realm, and later the brother of Catherine Parr. She married the king on June 5, 1536, thus beginning Henry's tempestuous trilogy of marriages among his 6 queens. Less than 2 years later, on October 12, 1537, Jane gave birth to Prince Edward at Hampton Court Palace. The infant, christened Edward Tudor, Prince of Wales, became the luminous hope of Henry, the first and only legitimate male heir, freeing the king from reliance on any more children born out of wedlock. But joy was brief. Jane, at just 30 years old, still in the spring of her life, fell gravely ill from postpartum complications. Unlike her predecessor, she was not executed, but departed this world quietly, 24 hours after giving birth. On October 24, 1537, surrounded by watching courtiers and whispered prayers echoing through the palace corridors. As the only queen to die while still reigning, Jane Seymour received the most elaborate funeral in Tudor history. On November 13, 1537, her coffin was conveyed by royal hearse from Hampton Court to St. George's Chapel within Windsor Castle. Soldiers and courtiers formed a sombre procession in the early morning mist, trumpets of the King's Guard sounding across the ancient moat bridge. Her tomb marker, a slab of black marble set in the chapel floor where coloured light filters through stained glass, bears the inscription. In a vault beneath this marble slab are deposited the remains of Jane Seymour, Queen of King Henry VIII, 1537, King Henry VIII, 1547, King Charles I, 1648, and an infant child of Queen Anne. How? This simple plaque has witnessed countless turnings of the Wheel of Fortune. No Renaissance style effigy stands above it, only a deep burial vault. Within that vault, Jane lies not alone. Her body rests beside the remains of Henry VIII himself, who was interred there on January 28, 1547, and also alongside King Charles I, executed on January 31, 1648, according to the Old English calendar, whose bones were reburied here by order of his son Charles II. A baby descended from King George I lies here too, uniting several generations of royal blood within one tomb. Since its completion, Jane Seymour's vault has been opened 3 separate times. The first occurred in 1813, when workmen repairing the chapel floor accidentally broke through the slab and discovered multiple coffins, including the lead caskets of Jane and Henry. The second opening came later that same year, when a party of high-ranking guests, including the future George IV, entered the vault seeking King Charles's remains to confirm his reburial. The third reopen happened in 1888, when preservationists and archaeologists lifted the slab to assess subsidence in the marble flooring. Throughout these disturbances, Jane's own coffin remained sealed and intact. Only Henry's casket was found cracked open, revealing skeletal remains. Despite being unsettled 3 times, Jane's bones have remained whole within her lead coffin, with no dislodged or missing segments. The vault's sturdy stone cover and the layer of concrete added at the mouth of the tomb guard her remains against any unauthorized digging, a protection Jane never knew in life, but that now preserves her peace for eternity. Though Windsor's climate can be damp, St. George's Chapel is kept dry, allowing the sanctuary where generations of monarchs rest to remain hushed and still. Within its walls, flickering candles reflect on the black marble slab, soft footsteps echo, and the whisper of prayers drifts overhead. Visitors pause before the memorial, gaze down at the inscription, Jane Seymour, and incline their heads in silence, remembering the queen who gave her body for her duty, only to depart this world before seeing her son grow. Jane Seymour's brief time as queen revealed a different aspect of Tudor rule. She consoled her king with a lawful heir, only to leave him bereft through the agony of childbirth. Her fate was not one of execution or political disgrace, but of relinquishment amid pride and sorrow. That is why she was honoured with such a solemn burial, afforded an enduring dignity, even though her days were numbered. And now, having traced the fates of Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour, we turn to Catherine Howard, the 5th wife of Henry VIII and cousin to Anne Boleyn. Catherine's story begins with her marriage to the king in July 1540. Born around 1521 into the Howard family, Catherine was youthful and spirited hardly more than a teenager when she caught Henry's eye. Yet her reign as queen would last scarcely more than a year before scandal and downfall overtook her. By early November 1541, rumours of Catherine's indiscretions reached Henry's ears. She was accused of adultery both prior to and during her marriage to the king, and of impropriety with her former music teacher and others at court. In late November, Catherine was stripped of her title, confined to the Tower of London, and judged guilty. Unlike Anne Boleyn, whose fate was sealed by sword, Catherine would meet the same fate by axe. On the morning of February 13th, 1542, a scaffold was erected on Tower Green, the same site where so many royal blood had been spilled. Catherine, now only around 21 years old, was led forth wearing a grey riding habit, her hair bound in a cap of shame rather than the sumptuous headdress befitting a queen. The executioner, a local man of the Tower, using a single stroke of the axe, severed her head from her body. The blow was swift, and her body fell forward, her lifeblood staining the planks beneath. There was no coffin waiting for her at the conclusion of the ceremony. Instead, Catherine's remains were placed in a shallow trench directly beneath the floor of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, just inside the choir, in front of the high altar. This very spot, considered the place of greatest honour within the chapel, had received her brother Henry VIII and her cousin Anne Boleyn only months earlier. Catherine thus became part of the same communal burial ground, sharing the earth with those once closest to the king's heart. Her interment was simple. The men who buried her used wooden shovels to scoop away damp clay, lowered her remains unembalmed into the trench, and covered them with loose earth. No lead-lined coffin, no marker or inscription to signal her resting place. She joined the silent ranks of traitors and fallen nobles beneath the stones of the chapel floor, her name consigned to memory rather than monument. In the late 18th century, when restorations to the chapel were undertaken, workmen discovered several sets of bones in front of the altar. Among them were the remains of Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, executed in 1541, and Jane Boleyn, Viscountess Rochford, who had been beheaded alongside Catherine's downfall. Yet in the scattered bones there was no sign of Catherine Howard's skeleton. From that enigma emerged three possibilities. First, Catherine's remains may simply have decayed entirely. Over more than 2 centuries of damp conditions and acidic soil, her bones could have dissolved to dust, leaving no trace. Second, those conducting the exhumation may have misidentified the burial trench, disturbing the wrong area, and leaving her bones undisturbed in an adjacent patch of earth. Lastly, her remains could have been removed at some point, perhaps by souvenir hunters or by church officials seeking to reorganize burials and transferred elsewhere, lost to history. To this day, Catherine Howard's final resting place remains a mystery. Some historians lean toward her bones having disintegrated, but the chapel's cool, stable environment might argue against total decay. Others hope that a future archaeological survey might pinpoint her burial spot, mapping the exact location with ground-penetrating radar and, perhaps, reuniting name with remains. But for now, no lead casket bears her name, and no carved stone commemorates her youthful life cut short. What endures is the paradox of her presence beneath the chapel floor. She rests where only the honorifically chosen were laid to rest. Yet she lies in anonymity, mere fragments of bone or none at all serving as her sole monument. The communal grave speaks to the nature of her downfall. Once Queen of England, then convicted traitor, now neither elevated nor entirely forgotten. In remembering Catherine Howard, we recall both the power she briefly wielded and the fragility of royal favour. Her story, married to a king famed for his quest for a son, accused of betrayal, executed by axe, captures the perilous intersection of politics, personal desire, and the demands of dynastic ambition. And in the quiet of St. Peter ad Vincula, her absence amid presence transforms a simple chapel floor into a poignant testament to a life that rose and fell with the turn of Henry's heart and the swing of a blade. And now, having traced the fates of Henry VIII's first 5 wives, we arrive at Catherine Parr, the 6th and final queen. Catherine, born in 1513 to the powerful Neville family, became Henry's queen consort when she married him on July 12, 1543. Unlike her predecessors, Catherine survived Henry's tumultuous reign. She was never accused of treason or adultery, and thus never faced execution. Instead, Catherine's end came through childbirth, a silent tragedy echoing those of Jane Seymour and earlier Tudor mothers. In June of 1547, not long after Henry's death, Catherine married her fourth husband, Thomas Seymour, Lord High Admiral and brother to Jane Seymour's father. The couple took up residence at Sudeley Castle in Gloucestershire, where Catherine found both affection and a measure of independence. On August 25, 1548, she gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Mary Seymour. However, the joy of motherhood was short-lived. On September 4, 1548, Catherine Parr succumbed to puerperal fever, then called childbed fever, a postpartum infection that ravaged many new mothers in the 16th century. At 35 years of age, she died quietly at Sudeley, surrounded by loyal attendants who prayed over her in her final hours. Catherine's funeral was unlike any other Tudor queen's. As the first English queen to die a Protestant, she received a modest Anglican service rather than the lavish Catholic rites her predecessors had known. On September 7, 1548, her coffin was borne from Sudeley Chapel to the adjacent St. Mary's Chapel, where she was interred behind the altar. The ceremony featured a stripped-down procession. Mourners wore simple black. Chants came from a handful of clergymen, and no royal regalia accompanied her bier. A plain ledger stone marked her tomb, inscribed, "Here lies Catherine Parr, Queen of King Henry VIII, who died on the 4th of September, 1548. Over the next century, however, Catherine's remains would suffer indignities that no queen should. During the late 1800s, when the chapel underwent repair work in 1784, labourers inadvertently broke through the floor, unearthing her coffin. Reports indicate that some local workers intoxicated on ale disturbed the coffin, allegedly removing small relics and causing damage to her skeleton. The chapel authorities reburied her hastily, but loose floorboards and damp conditions prompted another disinterment in 1811. Only in 1817 did the Duchy of Norfolk, then patron of Sudeley, commission a proper reinterment. Catherine's bones were gathered carefully into a new lead-lined coffin, consecrated by the Bishop of Gloucester, and laid to rest beneath a fresh ledger stone that remains in place today. A simple brass plaque now reads, "Catherine Parr, Queen of England, fourth wife of King Henry VIII, third wife of Lord High Admiral Thomas Seymour, born 1513, died September 4th, 1548, reinterred 1817. In her quiet repose, Catherine Parr lies at peace, where she once championed Protestant reform and even tutored the young Elizabeth. The ivy-clad walls of St. Mary's Chapel witness her legacy, a queen who navigated courtly peril, survived Henry's wrath, and died in the humble yet profound role of mother. Our journey now leaves Sudeley and carries us to Westminster Abbey, where we find Anne of Cleves, the fourth wife of Henry VIII, but the only one to outlive him and die of natural causes, not execution or illness tied to childbirth. Henry married Anne by proxy on January 16, 1540, though upon meeting her he famously declared her not as fair as she was painted. Their marriage was never consummated, and by July 9th of the same year, the marriage was annulled. Yet Henry granted Anne the status of the king's beloved sister, along with Berkhamsted Castle, Richmond Palace, and an income befitting a queen. Anne settled at Chelsea Manor in London and maintained a cordial relationship with Henry until his death on January 28, 1547. She continued to serve as sister to the king's daughters Mary and Elizabeth, offering them guidance and companionship. On July 16, 1557, at around 41 years of age, Anne of Cleves died peacefully at Chelsea Manor, likely of natural causes. Contemporary accounts do not report any execution or violence. Instead, she slipped away quietly, surrounded by trusted attendants and a loyal chaplain who prayed at her bedside. Mary I, now Queen of England, ensured Anne of Cleves's funeral adhered to Catholic rites, a reflection of Mary's own religious restoration. On July 20th, 1557, Anne's coffin was carried through the streets to Westminster Abbey, accompanied by nuns, priests, and representatives of the crown. She was laid to rest near the north wall of the abbey's choir, close to the tombs of former monarchs. A simple ledger stone, still visible today, is engraved. Anne of Cleves, King Henry VIII's fourth wife. Born 1515, died July 16, 1557. All Not a single disturbance has befallen her remains since then. Her tomb has remained undisturbed for more than 460 years. Anne of Cleves's peaceful end stands in stark contrast to the violent or tragic deaths of the other Tudor queens. She chose her own path after annulment, never seeking to reclaim lost glory, and died as she lived. Quietly, with dignity, and secure in her status as the king's beloved sister. In following the fractured destinies of these 6 women from execution by sword, to death by childbirth, to posthumous indignities, to serene natural passing, we glimpse the complex tapestry of Tudor power, faith, and family. Catherine Parr and Anne of Cleves, though different in every respect, both escaped Henry's fatal judgments. Yet their tombs tell equally compelling tales, one of religious conviction and maternal sacrifice, the other of political convenience and lasting peace. As we contemplate their resting places, Sudeley Chapel's modest stone and Westminster's hallowed floor, we close this chapter of our journey, mindful that history's echoes linger in every carved inscription, every hidden vault, every flicker of candlelight among these silent stones. And now, having paid our respects at Peterborough, we journey south to the Tower of London, where the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula houses the remains of 2 of Henry VIII's most ill-fated wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. This chapel lies just beyond the White Tower's shadow, its unassuming stone walls concealing a grim royal necropolis beneath the flagstones. For over 3 centuries, the graves of Anne and Catherine bore no individual markers. Their bodies, both executed by axe, rested in simple wooden chests in shallow trenches beneath the chapel floor. Anne Boleyn, beheaded on May 19, 1536, fell by the king's own command, her head severed by a single stroke of Jean Rombaud's blade. Catherine Howard, similarly condemned for adultery and treason, met her fate on February 13, 1542, her neck laid open by the axe of a Tower executioner. Neither queen received embalming nor lead-lined coffins. Instead, their unprotected remains lay exposed to damp earth and shifting foundations for generations. It was not until the extensive floor restorations of 1870 that workers discovered the need to identify these royal remains. In 1870, thin brass plates were laid flush with the newly relayed flags, one inscribed, Annie Boleyn, Queen, died May 19, MDXX MDX6. The other, Catherine Howard, Queen, died February 13, MDXLE. These modest plaques, recessed into the floor and tarnished by foot traffic, serve as the only direct memorials to these 2 queens. Visitors often stumble upon them only by the beam of a flashlight, the letters faint beneath centuries of wear. In addition to these memorial plaques, an engraved stainless steel panel stands near the chapel's entrance. This list commemorates all those interred beneath the floor: Anne Boleyn, her brother George Boleyn, Catherine Howard, and Jane Boleyn, Viscountess Rochford, Anne's lady-in-waiting who was executed alongside Catherine for her alleged role in the Queen's infidelities. In 2006, a more prominent external memorial was installed on the chapel's outer wall. A glass-etched panel listing all 6 of Henry's wives and including a brief poem reflecting on their harsh destinies, reminding passers-by that behind these walls lie the women who once wielded power and met with violent ends. The fates of Anne and Catherine share a tragic symmetry. Both were executed at Tower Green, their heads removed by expert swordsmen, yet neither was afforded the dignity of a royal coffin. Their dismembered skeletons were hastily lowered into trenches at the start of summer, a time when damp stone and acidic soil conspire to accelerate decay. Over the years, disturbances have scattered their bones. During floor repairs, fragments of Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, executed in 1541, were also unearthed, further mingling the remains of those deemed traitors. Some bones vanished completely, others fractured beyond identification. Scholars now believe that many pieces of Anne's and Catherine's skeletons have either crumbled to dust or been inadvertently removed by souvenir hunters. Yet the brass memorials remain, stubborn witnesses to their once exalted status. It is an odd inversion of honor that these 2 queens, condemned by royal decree and executed for crimes both real and contrived, were nevertheless laid to rest in the most prestigious location within the chapel, directly in front of the high altar. This spot, reserved for the most honored dead, affords both queens a paradoxical dignity. In death they share a place of reverence, even as their lives were marred by betrayal and downfall. The atmosphere inside St. Peter ad Vincula is hushed almost to the point of reverence. The cool air carries the faint aroma of incense from daily services. Voices echo as visitors step lightly on worn stone. One can almost see the flicker of candlelight dancing across the slab, marking Anne's plaque, and feel the chill of centuries of whispered prayers rising from Catherine's marker. In this solemn silence, the weight of history presses in, reminding us of Tudor power's cruelty and the endurance of memory. Here, within the tower's confines, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard lie among princes, priests and paupers, all sharing a common grave. Their stories, told through these unadorned markers, remind us that even queens can fall, and that time, in its inexorable passage, reduces both pomp and folly to dust. But their names etched in brass persist, honoured not by chiselled effigies or grand monuments, but by footfalls and fresh votive candles laid at their feet. As we step back from the red brick doorway, sunlight filtering through the chapel windows, we carry with us the memory of their tragic ends executed by axe, buried without pomp, yet memorialized by simple plaques. This contrast of violence and veneration captures the essence of their fates. And so, from the quiet of Peterborough to the hush of St. Peter ad Vincula, we conclude our tour of where Henry VIII's 6 wives have found their final rest. Each tomb a testament to ambition, loyalty, betrayal, and the unpredictable turns of history. Turning our attention from the sombre confines of the Tower, we travel west to Windsor Castle, specifically to its hallowed St. George's Chapel, where Jane Seymour and Henry VIII lie in neighbouring vaults. Jane, as the third Queen, occupies a unique place in Tudor history, the only wife to die in office, succumbing not to execution but to the perils of childbirth. Her funeral has entered the annals of pomp and ceremony, and her memorial remains one of the most visible in the royal chapel. Jane Seymour died of puerperal fever on October 24, 1537, at the age of 30. She passed away within the palace walls, surrounded by grieving courtiers. In recognition of her status and the king's affection, Henry mourned her deeply. Her funeral on November 13, 1537, was a spectacle of regal pageantry. A richly carved wooden coffin bore her body along the castle's causeway, flanked by knights in full armour and a choir chanting solemn dirges. The cortege proceeded through the Snow Hill Gate to the chapel's entrance, where a mosaic portrait of Jane in ivory and gold stood above the high altar, held aloft for the assembled nobility to see her likeness one final time. 11 years later, in 1837, King William IV formalised Jane's resting place with a permanent monument. He commissioned a black marble ledger slab set into the chapel floor, its polished surface bearing this inscription in capital letters. In a vault beneath this marble slab are deposited the remains of Jane Seymour, Queen of King Henry VIII MDXXXV, King Henry VIII MDXLV7, King Charles I MDXLV8, and an infant child of Queen Anne. This ledger occupies the very centre of the chapel floor, aligned perfectly with the royal pew above. Its striking contrast against pale stone makes it easily visible to any visitor. Over the decades, whenever the vault has been opened, such as during the chapel repairs of 1813 and again in 1888, Jane's lead coffin has remained undisturbed. Witnesses report that it was always found intact, a testament to the chapel's careful guardianship of her remains, even as other coffins and bones were jostled in the reordering of the crypt. Adjacent to Jane's slab lies the similarly inscribed ledger for Henry VIII himself, who was laid to rest beside her on January 28, 1547, 2 years after his death, in 1545. The proximity of their tombs symbolises the bond they shared, brief though it was, and cements Jane's legacy as the queen who provided Henry with his long-desired male heir. By contrast, Catherine Parr, Henry's 6th and final wife, rests far from the grandeur of Windsor. Catherine died of puerperal fever on September 4, 1548, at Sudeley Castle in Gloucestershire. Her simple funeral took place 3 days later in the castle's private chapel. There was no excision of estates, no grand equerries in attendance, merely a plain wooden coffin borne by local gentlemen in mourning cloaks. A single wooden panel affixed to the chapel wall bore the rudimentary inscription, "Here lies Catherine Parr, Queen of England, died the 4th of September, MDXLV8." Generations passed in quiet, rural observance until the late 18th century, when the chapel fell into disrepair. In 1784, workers replacing the roof inadvertently uncovered Catherine's grave. Local labourers, some unaccustomed to the solemnity of royal burial, reportedly desecrated the coffin in fits of drunken revelry. An attendant's diary from the period recounts shattered bone fragments and a damaged skull, vandalism born of drink and curiosity rather than sanctioned archaeology. The event scandalised county gentry, but left Catherine's remains scattered once more. In 1817, the situation was finally remedied. The Earl of Suffolk oversaw a proper exhumation and reinterment. Catherine's damaged bones were carefully collected and placed into a new lead-lined coffin, which was then interred beneath a freshly laid ledger stone in St Mary's Chapel at Sudeley. The new brass plaque reads, Catherine Parr, Queen of England, born MDX3, died September 4th, MDXLV8, reinterred MDCC17. Today, St Mary's Chapel retains a humble dignity. Ivy, clad walls, wooden pews worn by centuries of worshippers, and the gentle hush of country air drifting through open lancet windows. Catherine's modest monument stands unassuming beside those of local nobility, yet it commands respect through its simplicity and the trials her remains endured before final rest. Thus, from the grand vaults of Windsor to the rural chapel of Sudeley, we have witnessed a spectrum of royal funerary practice. Jane Seymour's ceremonial splendour and enduring ledger, Catherine Parr's humble service, defilement and eventual restoration. Each site reflects the Queen it honours. Jane's life cut short in royal service. Catherine's survival of court intrigue, only to fall victim to the perils of motherhood. And yet, in both cases, we see the same posthumous care. The lead coffins, the ledger stones, the annual remembrances binding them in death to the traditions and reverence owed to England's queens. In leaving Windsor behind, we carry with us the memory of their final rites. The clang of funeral bells, the scent of incense, the hush of candlelight. These echoes of ceremony remind us that even in death, the Tudor queens command a stature that neither axe nor fever could fully diminish. And so our journey continues, tracing the silent footprints of those who once shaped a kingdom and now rest beneath the stones that bear their names for eternity. And now, our final step brings us to Westminster Abbey, hallowed ground that bears the tomb of Anne of Cleves, the only one of Henry VIII's 6 wives, who both outlived him and died of natural causes. After her annulment in July 1540, Anne was granted the title the King's beloved sister, and lived out her days in comfortable retirement at Chelsea Manor. She never faced the executioner's axe, and so did not meet the fate of Anne Boleyn or Catherine Howard. Instead, on July 16, 1557, at about 41 years of age, Anne of Cleves passed away quietly, most likely from natural causes associated with middle age, rather than any violent end. Upon learning of her death, Queen Mary I, a devout Catholic, arranged a Catholic funeral befitting a former queen. On July 20th, 1557, Anne's coffin was borne through the abbey's nave by a retinue of priests and nuns. Incense curled into the abbey's vaulted ceiling, and Gregorian chants echoed among the stone pillars a final homage to a woman who had once been cast aside, then accepted back into the royal fold. Her body was laid to rest in a tomb cut directly into the floor of the North Ambulatory, beside some of England's greatest monarchs. To this day, Anne's grave remains undisturbed. Her ledger stone is a simple slab of pale Purbeck marble, inscribed in clear Roman capitals. Anne of Cleves, Queen of England, born MDXV, died MDLV. Hovint. Though modest, measuring barely 2 feet by 3, it occupies a place of honour near the northern entrance to the abbey, ensuring that every visitor passes within a few paces of her final resting place. Tour guides often pause here, inviting guests to read her name among the rows of carved stones marking kings, queens, and princely children. The effect is quietly moving. In a single glance, one sees the spectrum of Tudor fates from Anne Boleyn's silent brass plates and Jane Seymour's black marble vault to Catherine Parr's weathered wooden panel and, finally, this unadorned white stone memorial. Anne of Cleves's peaceful end and perpetual repose offer a stark contrast to the violent upheavals behind the abbey's other royal tombs. She was never executed, nor did she die amid scandal or suffering. Instead, her life after Henry was marked by relative tranquility, her tomb reflecting that same serenity. A small brass vase occasionally holds fresh flowers, often sprigs of lavender or rosemary, placed by well-wishers who admire her calm dignity. As we step back to take in the full chapel, we see the ledger stones of monarchs spanning centuries. Edward the Confessor, Henry III, Elizabeth I, all sharing this sacred floor. Within this august company, Anne of Cleves' simple slab reminds us that royal life did not always end in splendour or in blood, but sometimes in quiet passage and respectful remembrance. The abbey's custodians take great care to preserve her inscription and prevent wear from foot traffic. A polished brass rail runs just behind her stone, subtly guiding visitors to step lightly or kneel. In winter, light filters through tall, stained glass windows, bathing her ledger in a kaleidoscope of colour, as though the abbey itself honours her gentle spirit. Thus, from the weathered iron rails of Peterborough to the damp floor of St. Peter ad Vincula, onto the black marble of St. George's Chapel, the humble wood of Sudeley, and now this pale Purbeck marble in Westminster Abbey, we have followed Henry VIII's 6 queens on their final journeys. Each tomb and memorial stands as a testament to lives marked by political ambition, personal tragedy, and enduring legacies. Catherine of Aragon's steadfast faith, Anne Boleyn's political drama, Jane Seymour's sacrifice, Catherine Howard's downfall, Catherine Parr's resilience, and Anne of Cleves' tranquility all resonate beneath these hallowed stones. In their collective silence, these resting places speak volumes about the grandeur and brutality of Tudor England. They remind us that marriage could be a tool of statecraft, that queens could be executed or exiled as readily as they could be celebrated, and that in the end, only stone and memory remain. As we leave Westminster Abbey's sacred precincts, let us carry with us the echoes of candlelit vigils and whispered prayers, a fitting tribute to the 6 women whose lives and deaths shaped the course of English history. Amid these silent memorials to the 6 queens, we feel the Tudor saga unfold in every etched stone and flickering candle tales of love, power, and heartbreak intertwined. Yet behind every queen lies a child prince or princess bearing Henry VIII's blood and inheriting the kingdom's fate. It is through these mother-child bonds that the royal succession was forged or fragmented, and that triumph or tragedy found fresh expression in the unfolding chapters of England's story. And having reflected on the lives and resting places of Henry VIII's 6 queens, we now turn our gaze to their progeny, beginning with the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Princess Mary was the solitary child of Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Born on February 11, 1502, Mary Tudor entered a world shaped by both English and Spanish royalty, for her mother was the beloved daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Aragon and Castile. From her earliest days at Greenwich Palace, Mary was raised under strict Catholic tutelage. She received her baptism amidst solemn chapel rites, wearing a pearl-encrusted gown and clutching a rosary gifted by her mother. Portraits of the infant princess often show her solemn gaze framed by ruffs and fine lace, tangible symbols of her dual heritage. In childhood, Mary's life was one of privilege and piety. Tutors schooled her in Latin prayers, in the writings of church fathers, and in the art of dynastic ceremony. Henry and Catherine doted on their only surviving offspring. The king would grant Mary new gowns stitched with Tudor rose emblems, and the Queen would carry her on processions to Westminster Abbey. Yet this idyllic upbringing would shatter when Henry, frustrated at producing no male heir, sought an annulment from Pope Clement VII to marry Anne Boleyn. Overnight, Mary's status plunged from princess to the king's daughter, an illegitimate offspring in the eyes of the court. On January 7, 1536, Catherine of Aragon passed away at Kimbolton Castle, leaving Mary motherless at the age of 35. The young widow of Spain's former princess begged Emperor Charles V, her cousin, and Spain's sovereign to intervene on her behalf. Letters survive in which Mary pleaded that her mother be restored to her honours. Yet the emperor's diplomatic entanglements forced him to remain silent. When Anne Boleyn ascended the throne as queen, Mary was stripped of her titles and sent to reside at Hunsdon House, her garments downgraded and her retinue reduced. For years she endured life in a state of genteel confinement, her rightful place usurped by the new queen. That all changed when Edward VI, the son of Jane Seymour, died childless in 1553. Mary returned triumphantly to London and was proclaimed Queen Mary I on July 16, 1553. At her coronation in Westminster Abbey, the bells rang and garlands festooned the streets. Mary took her oath upon a richly embroidered Bible, vowing to restore England's allegiance to the Roman Catholic Church. She commissioned the revival of Mass, reinstated the old liturgy, and repealed the Protestant reforms of her half-brother and sister. Mary's reign, though lasting just 2 years, was marked by fierce measures. Determined to strengthen the Catholic faith, she ordered the burning of nearly 300 Protestant dissenters, earning the sobriquet Bloody Mary. Executions by stake were carried out at Smithfield and other public squares, and the church's reclaiming of lands stirred unease among former supporters. Yet even these harsh acts sprang from Mary's conviction, as she believed that saving souls by returning them to the true faith justified the severity of her methods. On November 7, 1558, at St. James's Palace, Queen Mary I died suddenly, likely from ovarian or uterine cancer, at the age of 56. She left no children to succeed her. According to contemporary accounts, she spent her final hours in prayer, entrusting her cause to divine mercy. Her funeral, conducted in Catholic solemnity, preceded the accession of her half-sister Elizabeth, who swiftly reinstated Protestant worship. Mary's legacy remained complex. She stands as the first female monarch to rule England in her own right, and her 2 years of sovereignty represent a dramatic reversal of her earlier fall from favour. The burnings that stained her reign, while often condemned as brutality, also underscore the depth of her religious resolve inherited from her mother's devout Catholicism. Portraits of Mary in mature years show her in dark gowns and heavy ruffs, a crown perched atop her head and a rosary hanging from her belt, symbols of her unbending faith and royal dignity. In the centuries since, Mary's tomb at Westminster Abbey has been untroubled by exhumations or desecrations. Her ledger stone bears the simple inscription, "Here lies Mary I, first crowned Queen of England, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, who died November 7th, MDLV8. Pilgrims pause before her memorial to reflect on the iron will that guided her brief yet momentous reign. They consider the poignancy of her life. The child stripped of birthrights, the princess turned outcast, the queen restored and resolute, and ultimately, the woman who restored and then relinquished the oldest faith in England. Princess Mary's journey, from her mother's throne at Greenwich to her own in Westminster, demonstrates how the Tudor dynasty's marital intrigues shaped the destinies of their children. It reminds us that beneath every queen's fate lay the futures of sons and daughters, futures that would continue to mould the course of English history long after the last Tudor torch flickered out. And having witnessed Mary Tudor's turbulent yet devout reign, we now turn to her half-sister, the daughter of Anne Boleyn Elizabeth I, whose story transforms personal tragedy into an era-defining triumph. Elizabeth was born on September 23, 1533, at Greenwich Palace. From the moment of her birth, her destiny was entwined with courtly drama. As a toddler of little more than 2 years, Elizabeth's life was shattered when her mother, Anne Boleyn, was arrested, tried for treason and adultery, and publicly executed on May 19, 1536. Overnight, Princess Elizabeth became Lady Elizabeth, an illegitimate child in the eyes of the realm. Her father, Henry VIII, declared his marriage to Anne null ab initio, stripping Elizabeth of her royal status. Yet even in disgrace, the young girl was placed under the careful tutelage of some of England's finest scholars, including Roger Ascham, who would later praise her command of Latin, Greek, and rhetoric. Despite her demotion, Elizabeth received a princely education. She mastered classical languages, Latin and Greek, by her adolescence, studied French and Italian, and excelled in music and dance. Her tutors noted her quick wit and sharp memory, and she began composing poetry in English as a young teenager. While her half-brother, Edward VI, further tightened the Protestant reforms in England, Elizabeth navigated a precarious position, too Protestant for Mary I's Catholic court, yet too connected to Anne Boleyn's lineage to be fully trusted. She was kept under watchful eyes, moved between households, and at times confined for her own safety. A year after Edward's death in July 1553, and 2 years into Mary's reign, court politics shifted again. Mary's illness and lack of heirs left the succession in doubt. On November 17th, 1558, the dying queen named Elizabeth as her successor, setting the stage for one of history's most storied reigns. At age 25, Elizabeth ascended the throne on November 17th, 1558, amidst both jubilation and uncertainty. Her coronation on January 15th, 1559, in Westminster Abbey, was a carefully staged religious and political spectacle, reaffirming Protestant worship while appeasing moderate Catholics. Elizabeth's 25-year rule, known as the Elizabethan era, encompassed religious consolidation, cultural renaissance, and naval triumph. In 1588, the defeat of the Spanish Armada under Sir Francis Drake cemented England's maritime prestige and Elizabeth's reputation as the Virgin Queen, a monarch devoted solely to her nation. Patronage of the arts blossomed as playwrights like William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson penned works that defined English literature. Court masques and public theatres flourished, while explorers such as Sir Walter Raleigh expanded England's global reach. Elizabeth's governance balanced religious factions through the Elizabethan religious settlement, establishing the Church of England's via media between Catholic ritual and Protestant doctrine. She skillfully managed Parliament, granting concessions while maintaining royal prerogative. Her famous speeches, "I have but one mistress Elizabeth, and no master but God," inspired loyalty and underscored her independence. Though courtiers pressed her to marry foreign princes or powerful nobles, she remained single, using her unmarried status as diplomatic leverage and a symbol of England's sovereignty. On March 23, 1602, Queen Elizabeth I died quietly at Richmond Palace at the age of 69, likely from natural causes after a brief illness. In her final days, she ensured the peaceful succession of James V I of Scotland, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, tying the Tudor legacy to the Stuart line. She bequeathed no direct descendants, leaving England to a new dynasty but an enduring legacy of stability and flourishing arts. Elizabeth's burial at Westminster Abbey was conducted with Tudor pageantry and Reformation rites. Her coffin of English oak lay beneath a white marble tomb in Peterborough Cathedral, per her own instructions, to rest beside her sister Mary, whose Catholic leanings she had once opposed. Despite the religious divides of their lifetimes, Elizabeth's final wish united the two sisters in stone, a silent testament to their shared blood and conflicting fates. Elizabeth I's own ledger stone remains in Peterborough, but her name and legacy echo most strongly in the Abbey. Among the ledger stones of monarchs, a brass plaque near the choir screen reads simply, "Elizabeth I." Yet in that concise marker lies the story of a queen who rose from disgrace to lead England into a golden age. Her life, born of scandal, forged by exile, crowned in triumph, embodies resilience and vision. Thus, from Catherine of Aragon's princess to Mary's devout yet stormy reign, and now to Elizabeth's sovereign brilliance, we see how Henry VIII's children bore the weight of his matrimonial matters. They inherited not merely crowns or controversies, but the power to shape religious life, national identity, and a cultural legacy that endures to this day. As we stand among their tombs, each a chapter in Tudor history, we recognize that their lives, carved in stone and memory, continue to guide the story of England's monarchy and its people. And so we arrive at the final Tudor heir, born under Henry VIII's tumultuous reign, Prince Edward, the only son of Jane Seymour. Born on October 12, 1537, at Hampton Court Palace, Edward Tudor entered the world amid great rejoicing. For more than 2 decades, Henry VIII had longed for a male heir, and at last his prayers were answered. On November 23, 1537, just 6 weeks after Edward's birth, the infant prince was created Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester, in a lavish ceremony at Westminster Hall, the royal regalia placed upon his small shoulders, amid cheers and trumpets. From his earliest days, Edward was wrapped in both royal finery and the weighty expectations of the Tudor dynasty. His education was entrusted to leading Protestant figures of the realm. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and Bishop Stephen Gardiner took charge of his spiritual and intellectual formation, respectively. Under their tutelage, Edward embarked on a rigorous curriculum: Latin grammar, Greek rhetoric, arithmetic, and Protestant theology. Tutors recorded that the prince showed a keen mind and earnest disposition traits highly prized by Cranmer, who hoped to mould him into the new Josiah, a king who would guide England toward true Reformation faith. Tragically, Jane Seymour's joy was short-lived. On October 24th, 1537, 12 days after Edward's birth, Jane succumbed to puerperal fever, leaving her son motherless at just 2 weeks old. The infant Edward was cradled in the regency of his uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, who served as Lord Protector, and of course under the watchful eye of Cranmer. During these years, England's Protestant reforms accelerated. The Mass was abolished, monasteries dissolved, and the Book of Common Prayer was prepared for Edward's use once he came of age. When Edward reached his 16th birthday on October 12, 1553, he was crowned in a splendid ceremony at Westminster Abbey as Edward VI, King of England, France and Ireland. His coronation oaths pledged to uphold Protestant doctrine, to continue Cranmer's reforms, and to govern with mercy. Yet just as his accession promised a new dawn, Edward's health faltered. Physicians of the day described his condition as consumption, what we now know as pulmonary tuberculosis, a wasting disease for which there was no cure. Despite his frailty, Edward remained resolute in his role as monarch. He presided over the introduction of the 42 Articles of Religion, which codified the Church of England's doctrine. He also supported the publication of the Great Bible in English, placing scripture into the hands of ordinary subjects. His court became a centre of learning and piety, though the prince himself was confined by illness to the royal apartments at Whitehall and later at Windsor. Edward's reign, while short, left an indelible mark. In the summer of 1553, mere months after his coronation, his health deteriorated further. On July 6, 1553, King Edward VI died at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich, just days before his 16th birthday. His final words, recorded by his attendants, emphasized his desire for unity among his people and adherence to the Protestant faith. He left no children or direct heirs, plunging England into a succession crisis that would ignite fierce contention between his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth. At Westminster Abbey, Edward's tomb lies beside that of his father, Henry VIII, and his sister Jane Seymour. His ledger stone bears a succinct inscription. Here lies Edward VI, King of England, France and Ireland, son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, who reigned 6 years, 10 months and 14 days, and died July 6th, MDLII. Visitors to the abbey often pause at his tomb, reflecting on the promised sorrowful conclusion of a life cut short. Edward's Anglican reforms endured through subsequent reigns, shaping English religious identity for centuries. His counsellors and Protestant allies revered him as a child king who, despite delicate health, steered the realm toward lasting change. In tracing Edward's life from the exuberant halls of Hampton Court through the rigorous studies imposed by Cranmer and Gardiner, to his coronation's splendour and his final decline into illness, we see the arc of the Tudor machine at work. He was born at the apex of dynastic ambition, invested with immense symbolic power as the legitimate male heir, and then succumbed swiftly to mortal frailty. Yet his brief tenure consolidated the Protestant Reformation in England, and left a legacy of religious reform that would outlast his fragile reign. Thus concludes the story of Henry VIII's only son, the prince whose textbook within Cranmer's care established the doctrinal foundations of the Church of England, whose youth captivated a nation, and whose death triggered the most tumultuous succession crisis in Tudor memory. In memorializing Edward VI through his orderly ledger, his lasting reforms, and his poignant epitaph, we honor both his potential and his sacrifice, a final testament to the aspirations and fragilities at the heart of Tudor rule. And having traced the dramatic arcs of Henry VIII's legitimate children and the turbulent fates of his queens, we turn our gaze to Anne of Cleves, his fourth wife, whose marriage was governed by politics rather than passion, and who departed this world without issue. Anne of Cleves entered Henry's life through the careful diplomacy of 1539, when Thomas Cromwell negotiated a marriage treaty with her brother, Duke William of Cleves. The wedding by proxy took place on January 6, 1540, and on January 28th, Henry and Anne met in person at Greenwich. Legend has it that the king found her beauty more modest than the artwork suggested, though modern historians debate the accuracy of this tale. What is certain is that their union was never consummated, and swiftly proved unsuitable for the tempestuous Tudor court. By July 9, 1540, merely 6 months after the official marriage, an Act of Parliament annulled the marriage ab initio on grounds of non-consummation and their canonical relationship by affinity. Anne had once been betrothed to Henry's brother, though that match never occurred. Yet unlike Catherine Howard or Anne Boleyn, Anne of Cleves was treated with remarkable generosity. She was accorded the title of the King's beloved sister, granted Richmond Palace and a residence at Chelsea Manor, and enjoyed an annual income of £2,000, an enormous sum in Tudor England. Anne pledged loyalty to Henry and maintained cordial relations with her former husband and his subsequent queens. Anne of Cleves's life after annulment was distinguished by peaceful retirements rather than political intrigue. At Richmond Palace, she entertained nobles, hosted banquets, and took pleasure in gardening, an activity befitting her German upbringing, where horticulture was highly valued among the Cleves court. At Chelsea Manor, she corresponded with Henry's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, and even mediated disputes between rival courtiers. Her religious stance was one of moderation. She accepted the English Reformation without rancour toward either Protestants or Catholics, embodying a spirit of conciliation that stood in stark contrast to the fierce partisanship of other Tudor figures. Anne's marriage to Henry, though childless, served its diplomatic purpose. It temporarily aligned England with German Protestant principalities and gave Cranmer and Cromwell political leverage. Yet in the long run, the absence of an heir from this union underscored the limitations of matrimony as foreign policy. Anne's personal friendship with Henry endured. She was one of the few ex-queens invited to his funeral in 1547, revealing the genuine affection that transcended their annulled vows. On July 16, 1557, at approximately 41 years of age, Anne of Cleves died peacefully at Chelsea Manor. There was no execution, no fatal illness from childbirth, only the gradual decline that comes with middle age. Contemporary accounts note that she had fallen ill with a fever, likely exacerbated by the summer heat. She summoned her chaplain, received the last rites of the Church of England, and bid farewell to the servants she had kept on her household staff. Anne's funeral, arranged by the entrenched Catholic Queen Mary I, followed traditional Catholic rites, a final act of religious reconciliation in a country riven by Protestant reforms. On July 20th, 1557, her coffin was borne to Westminster Abbey, carried by a small retinue of mourners rather than a vast cortege. The procession entered through the north gate, and inside the abbey's hushed interior, Anne's body was laid to rest near the high altar. Her tomb, a ledger stone of pale Purbeck marble, reads simply, Anne of Cleves, Queen of England, born MDXV, died MDLV7. This modest inscription occupies a place of honour. Just inside the north aisle, it stands among those of monarchs who died in more dramatic circumstances. The stone remains untouched by disinterment or vandalism. It is one of the few royal tombs in the abbey that has never been opened or relocated. Visitors walking the abbey's ambulatory often pause before her ledger, struck by its understated elegance and the silent testament it offers to a life marked by diplomacy, dignity, and the quiet virtues of a childless widow. Anne's childlessness marked the final failure of Henry's quest for heirs outside his immediate legacy through Jane Seymour and Edward VI. Yet her survival and serene demise highlight a different Tudor theme, the promise of peace and stability that sometimes lay dormant beneath the crown's more tumultuous exteriors. Anne's ability to live amicably amid religious upheavals and royal scandals speaks to her personal resilience and political wisdom. In the end, Anne of Cleves's story reminds us that not every royal marriage culminated in progeny or palace drama. Some unions were short-lived arrangements that yielded no children but nonetheless influenced the course of alliances and power. Anne's tomb at Westminster Abbey stands as a monument to the woman who navigated the perils of Henry's court with grace, lived on in prosperity, and died not by the hangman's axe or in childbirth, but by the gentle hand of nature itself. She remains, to this day, an emblem of political alliance turned personal peace, a quietly enduring figure in the tumultuous saga of Tudor England. And now, leaving behind Anne of Cleves's peaceful retirement and childless end, we return to the Tower's darker chapter, with Catherine Howard, the youngest and fifth wife of Henry VIII, and the poignant tale of a lineage that never took root. Catherine Howard came to court from the Howard family, a teenage cousin of Anne Boleyn, imbued with youth's vivacity and courtly grace. In July 1540, at the tender age of about 17 or 18, she married Henry VIII in a sumptuous celebration at Hampton Court. Her beauty and esprit briefly captured Henry's heart, offering him a new consort after 4 marriages fraught with disappointment. Yet the promise of a fresh political alliance and potential heirs evaporated swiftly. Catherine's time as queen lasted scarcely 16 months, and she never bore a child. During her brief tenure, rumours circulated of Catherine's past romantic liaisons and alleged adulteries. Jane Boleyn, Viscountess Rochford, Anne Boleyn's sister-in-law, and Catherine's former mentor, was implicated for facilitating these indiscretions. In November 1541, Henry ordered Jane removed from court, and in December, Catherine was stripped of her title, confined to the Tower of London, and formally charged with adultery, a crime tantamount to treason. On the cold morning of February 13, 1542, just shy of her 20th birthday, Catherine Howard faced the grim scaffold on Tower Green. She wore a grey riding habit and a cap concealing her blonde locks, a cap of shame rather than the regal diadem she had once worn. The executioner's axe, wielded by a skilled headsman, fell in a single, precise stroke, severing her life as abruptly as her queenship had begun. There was no time to gather an heir. Her womb remained untested and unfulfilled. Catherine died childless, her lineage collapsing in a single generation. Unlike her cousin Anne Boleyn, whose remains were memorialized with a brass plaque in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, Catherine's final resting place is lost to history. Most accounts agree her body was interred in a shallow trench beneath the chapel floor, directly in front of the high altar, a position of nominal honour that belied her disgrace. Yet no vault, no coffin, no lead lining protected her mortal remains. Over centuries of chapel floor repairs, her bones either crumbled into dust or were inadvertently removed without record. Some historians speculate that without embalming, and in the dank crypt environment, her skeleton decayed completely. Others suggest that early modern workers, or souvenir hunters, may have deliberately exhumed and discarded her remains. Catherine Howard's childlessness had lasting repercussions for the powerful Howard clan. Once elevated by her marriage to royal prominence, the family found its fortunes reversed by her downfall. The failure to produce an heir who might have bridged the Howards to the Tudor succession, cast a shadow over subsequent Howard ambitions. Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, Catherine's grandfather, saw his granddaughter's disgrace tarnish his house's standing at court, weakening the family's influence and complicating its efforts to arrange advantageous marriages for its remaining members. The echo of no heirs haunted Catherine's brief impact on Tudor politics. Unlike Anne of Cleves, who lived decades more to serve as a stable king's sister, Catherine left neither progeny nor extended influence. Her story stands as a cautionary tale of royal and familial ambition, a young woman thrust into the maelstrom of Tudor marriage politics, used as a diplomatic pawn, then discarded without mercy when she failed to fulfill the dynastic imperative of producing a male heir. Yet within this tragic outline, one finds a human dimension. Catherine's youth, her vulnerability in Henry's court, and the immeasurable pressure placed upon her slender shoulders. No letters from her survive. No tomb inscription marks her fleeting life. All that remains are the scant archival hints of her execution and the empty space where her bones once lay. The curse of no descendants lingers, a reminder that even in an age of powerful marriages, the most enduring legacy of a queen could be the line she failed to continue. In epitaph, Catherine Howard's life and death reflect the stark realities of Tudor monarchy. Queens were valued for their capacity to bear heirs. When they did not, or when political winds shifted, they could be supplanted or executed with alarming swiftness. The absence of Catherine's descendants crystallizes the personal tragedy that often accompanied political marriages. Her family's hopes born with her wedding died with her execution, leaving behind a Howard lineage that would never connect to the Tudor crown. And so, in the silent floorboards of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, beneath the broad shadows of the tower's walls, Catherine Howard's story remains an empty ledger, a line severed before completion, a chapter without continuation. Her life, cut short, and her childless end serve as a final, sombre expression of the Tudor saga's relentless demand for heirs and the human cost at the court's heart. Transitioning from the stark loss suffered by Catherine Howard and the vanishing of her lineage, we now arrive at the final queen of Henry VIII, Catherine Parr, and the poignant story of her only child, Mary Seymour. Catherine Parr married Henry VIII on July 12, 1543, becoming his sixth and last wife. Unlike many of her predecessors, she survived Henry's death in 1547. Within months, she married her longtime suitor and royal uncle by marriage, Thomas Seymour, Lord High Admiral of England. Their union, though tinged with scandal, Thomas was arrested for alleged flirtation with the young Elizabeth Tudor, produced a single daughter, Mary Seymour. Mary Seymour was born at Sudeley Castle on August 10, 1548. Her arrival coincided with the tumult of religious change. England under Henry VIII had severed ties with Rome, and Catherine Parr was a key influence in steering the kingdom toward Protestant reforms while preserving peace between rival factions. In this context, Mary's birth was hailed as a symbol of religious reconciliation and dynastic promise. The newborn princess was baptized in St. Mary's Chapel at Sudeley by the local bishop, wearing a gown of white satin edged with lace, a garment befitting a child of the king's widow and queen. Courtiers spoke of her angelic countenance, and gifts poured in: silver spoons from the gentry, fine linens from the Seymour family, and a small emerald ring from Catherine herself. Yet the promise of Mary's life was tragically cut short. Catherine Parr, having overseen her daughter's christening, fell ill days after Mary's birth. On September 4th, 1548, Catherine succumbed to puerperal fever, leaving the infant motherless at barely a month old. Thomas Seymour, distraught, entrusted Mary to Catherine's lady-in-waiting, yet in the harsh conditions of Tudor childcare where infant mortality was tragically common, the princess too contracted a fever. On November 21st, 1548, at barely 3 months of age, Mary Seymour died at Sudeley, her brief life enfolded in grief. Mary Seymour's fate illuminates the fragility of maternal bonds and neonatal survival in the 16th century. Though born legitimately, she never grew to fulfill the dynastic role for which her grandmother, Catherine of Aragon, had once been reproached, nor to carry forward the lineage of the Tudors. Her brief existence underscores the perilous nature of childbirth and infant care. Even in a royal household with access to the best physicians, the childbed fever that claimed Catherine often spread to newborns, unchecked by contemporary medical knowledge. Both Catherine Parr and Mary Seymour were interred in Sudeley's St. Mary's Chapel. Initially, mother and daughter were laid in a simple grave marked only by a wooden board. Over the centuries, that burial site underwent neglect. The chapel deteriorated, and local villagers reported hearing eerie cries near the tomb on dark nights, perhaps the echo of maternal sorrow. In 1784, during restoration work, labourers uncovered fragments of a lead-lined infant coffin and part of a damaged adult coffin, evidence of both Catherine's and Mary's remains. The story goes that some workers, mistaking the fragile vestiges for scrap, broke off pieces of the lead lining for sale, inadvertently scattering bone fragments. Finally, in 1817, the Earl of Suffolk commissioned archaeologists to properly reinter Mary and her mother. They gathered the remnants, skulls, femurs, and tiny rib fragments, placing them in newly cast lead coffins. A pair of simple stone slabs was installed within the chapel's chancel floor, bearing this joint inscription: Catherine Parr, Queen of England, born MDX3, died September 4th, MDXLV. Mary Seymour, daughter of Catherine Parr, born August 10th, MDXLV8, died November 21st, MDXLV8, reinterred MDCCCXV7. Since then, Catherine and Mary lie together, in respectful repose. A modern brass plaque affixed to the nave wall recounts their lives and reburial, reminding pilgrims of the intertwined mother-daughter bond and the perils they faced. The chapel now serves not only as a place of quiet worship, but also as a memorial to the human cost of Tudor succession politics and the medical limitations of the age. Mary Seymour's fleeting presence in history nevertheless resonates. Though she never lived to inherit a crown, her name echoes across centuries as a symbol of a mother's devotion and a child's vulnerability. Her life and death illustrate how even the highest birth could not guarantee survival in an era when infection claimed countless lives. In that small Tudor coffin and the plaque above it, visitors encounter a story that transcends dynastic intrigue, the universal tale of a mother and daughter united in both life and death. Thus, as we leave Sudeley Castle behind, the quiet stones of St. Mary's Chapel bear witness to Catherine Parr's serene final years and the tragic brevity of little Mary Seymour's life. Their shared tomb reminds us that behind every royal marriage, every treaty, and every succession crisis, there remain the delicate threads of family and the enduring gravity of loss in the human story. And so, as our lanterns grow dim and the last echoes of Tudor footsteps fade into stillness, allow yourself to drift gently on the soft currents of history. Imagine the hush of candlelight dancing along ancient walls, the muted rustle of velvet curtains closed against the night air, and the distant toll of a single bell marking the close of one chapter and the embrace of peaceful rest. In this tender silence, remember that these 6 women, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, each lived lives woven of duty, devotion, and delicate ambitions. Their joys and sorrows remind us that no crown can shield its wearer from the frailties of the human heart. No throne can hold back the tides of fate. Yet within their stories lie enduring truths. That love can outlast betrayal, that courage can bloom amid adversity, and that even the smallest voice, a newborn princess, a learning queen, can echo through the ages. Let your breathing grow slow and steady, like the turning of parchment pages in a quiet library. With each exhale, feel the weight of the day slip away, carried off on gentle currents toward a distant shore. With each inhale, draw in the peacefulness of these old stones and whispered prayers, carrying their calm into your very bones. As you settle into the soft cradle of night, know that the world of power and intrigue can rest for a time, just as you will. The crowns, the swords, the whispered counsels, all may lie quiet until dawn, leaving only memory's soft glow to warm the shadows. And you too deserve this pause, a moment to honor both the triumphs and tragedies of lives long past, and to gift yourself the simple joy of peaceful dreaming. May the lessons of resilience and compassion you have gathered tonight drift gently into your sleep, weaving into dreams that carry echoes of midnight choirs and the rustle of silk gowns. May you awake refreshed, with a heart open to wonder and a mind ready for new journeys. Good night, dear traveller. May your rest be deep and your dreams sweet. And when you awaken, we would be honoured to welcome you back. Subscribe now to join us for more tales that stir the imagination and soothe the soul, bringing you our finest stories and freshest discoveries. Until we meet again, sleep well and let history's gentle whisper guide you into the softest of slumbers.